So good evening, everyone. And welcome, and particularly welcome to Arthur Brooks. We're really pleased you're here. I'm Brad Joy. I know many of you, but not all of you, and I welcome you on behalf of MBA. I teach English here, and I'm the headmaster. And we haven't been able to do one of these programs since the fall of 2019. And Cherie and I were talking earlier today, and next year will be our 10th year. So we're pleased to be back in business and to have you here tonight and have a great program, and hope it is an enjoyable evening on every count. I had suggested that we get Arthur Brooks because the only TV show I watch fairly regularly is Squawk Box. So I get up early, and I like Joe Kernan and his crazy humor. And I got to know Arthur Brooks even better watching him on Squawk Box, and then, of course, enjoying his books. And I just read Strength to Strength the week before last. I was telling him earlier, and it was particularly meaningful to me in terms of where I am in my own life. But a quick recount of his story that I want to mention tonight is that many of you know for about 12 years, between the ages, I guess, of 19 and 31, he played music all over the world. And then he decided that he would get a college degree, which he did more by correspondence. And then he got this fabulous job at a think tank in Washington, and there was a series of public discussions about one's pedigree, where you went to school, what background you have. And he decided to come out of the closet, so to speak, and say, you know, I didn't go to Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, but I got a great education, and I work hard. And it meant a lot to a lot of people. And so, I think that's another reason that you'll enjoy hearing from him. But I'm here to say good evening and welcome you, and now have my friend Cherie Harder come up, who's president of the Trinity Forum and has been working with us for now almost 10 years. So join me in welcoming Cherie.
Well, thank you so much for that, Brad, and welcome to all of you for our completely sold-out evening conversation with Arthur Brooks on healing a divided culture. It's so good to be back in Nashville. It's been 2.5 years, as Brad was saying. It's just great to see you all. It's great to be doing this again, and we're just so excited to get to restart what has been a really wonderful collaboration between the Trinity Forum and Brad Joy at Montgomery Bell Academy and St. Paul Academy, now led by Will Norton. So we're just really tickled to be back here and to get to see you all and to restart what has been a great thing and will hopefully be an even better thing in the years ahead. I want to acknowledge a few special guests tonight. I'm just really delighted that we have several of our trustees here, Byron Smith, of course, Sam Funk and his wife, Betsy. Our chairman of the board, Richard Miles, has flown in with his wife, Phoebe Miles. Really delighted you're here. I believe Mayor John Cooper is here. We're really pleased by that. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank a special guest who actually opened up our very first collaboration and first evening conversation here in Nashville. He was the one who gave the original welcome on that day 9 years ago, almost to the day. And we're just so delighted that Governor Bill Haslam is here with his wife, Chrissy. So thank you for being here. I'd also just like to thank all of the very generous sponsors whose support has made this evening possible, including Lee and Mary Barfield, Kevin and Jessica Douglas, David and Ashley Edwards, Eric and Eleanor Osborne, Ed and Molly Powell, Giff and Anna Thornton, our corporate sponsors of Sims Funk and GAW Properties, and the foundations of the Cheris Foundation and the Creed and Culture Fund. Of course, we're also just delighted that each one of you is here. I know there's been a lot of interest. We're sold out. Quarters are undeniably cozy. Many of you have told us that you had friends who wanted to come and could not. So fear not, we are live streaming. That will be being broadcast on MBA's channel. And if you have friends who wanted to see tonight's evening conversation but aren't here, you can always direct them that way. And if you're joining us by live stream, thank you. We're delighted you're here. We know that sometimes it feels a little bit distant. You can't quite ask a question in person, but we welcome your participation through Twitter and Facebook and posing questions there. Our Twitter feed channel is #TTFTonight, so you can follow along there as well. It's hard to believe, as Brad was saying, that it's been nearly a decade since we first started this series, which, like so many good things, has been put on hold for the last 2.5 years. But since tonight represents a bit of a restart of that effort, I wanted to share just a little bit about the purpose of this forum and these events, as well as our topic and our speaker. Part of the mission of the Trinity Forum is to provide a place for leaders to wrestle with the big questions of life in the context of faith, and to cultivate, curate, and disseminate the best of Christian thought. And so when we first started this effort in 2013, we've tackled a broad range of topics. We explored with Os Guinness the question of whether freedom can last. We heard from poet Dana Gioia on why beauty matters. We looked with Oxford mathematician John Lennox on whether science and faith can mix. Princeton professor Eric Gregory took us through a tour of the life and thought of Augustine. Scholar Karen Swallow Pryor told us what it means to read well. Senator Sass reflected on tribalism and community. And columnist David Brooks talked about the ways that character is formed and reformed. In each case, our aim was not only to connect leading thinkers nationally with thinking leaders here locally, but host discussions that would catalyze other conversations, connection, and community around what matters most, and to invite reflection on those big questions of life, and ultimately come to better know the author of the answers. And it seems undeniable that now one of the biggest questions facing us is how we live together and pursue the common good across a deep difference. And certainly, one of the most urgent crises we face is not only a civic problem, but also a spiritual one. It's a crisis of fear, loathing, and contempt, a failure of love. Increasingly, we view our fellow citizens not as neighbors, but as antagonists or even enemies. There have been recent studies that have shown that more than 40% of Americans reportedly view their political opponents as evil. Nearly 20% of partisans on each side of the divide admit to, quote, thinking on occasion that the country would be better off if large numbers of the opposition died. And in a recent Washington Post and University of Maryland poll released just a few months ago, nearly a third of those polls said the violence against the government is sometimes justified. Those are shocking and raise the question of how did we get here? How did we arrive at the place where, in the words of our guest, we increasingly view people who disagree with us not merely as incorrect, misguided, but as worthless? And how do we reweave the compassion and care for others into a civic fabric corroded by contempt? Our guest today is a scholar, social scientist, and policy wonk by background, but offers a way forward that's not primarily academic or political, but both spiritual and deeply practical. The antidote to our current ills, he suggests, can be found in the ancient New Testament teaching to love your neighbor and indeed to love your enemies. And that subverting our culture of contempt, treating others with love and respect, is among the most needed and most powerful forms of radical civic renewal. It's an intriguing, inspiring, and deeply countercultural argument, and there are few who can make it with the persuasive passion, panache, or piles of data as our guest this evening, Arthur Brooks. Arthur is an economist who serves as the professor of public leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, as well as on the faculty of Harvard Business School, after a remarkable, even legendary decade of service as the CEO of the American Enterprise Institute, one of the world's most influential think tanks. But as Brad mentioned a little bit earlier, his path to policy and academic leadership has been an unusual one. At the age of 19, he dropped out of college to play the French horn professionally, touring internationally, before he settled into the City Orchestra of Barcelona, where he met and wooed his wife, despite the fact that the only language they both spoke was that of music. He later returned to the U.S., completed his bachelor's by correspondence, and went on to earn a PhD in public policy and microeconomics, eventually becoming a professor of public administration at Syracuse University, where his research on behavioral economics landed him a job as a visiting scholar at AEI before he assumed the top job, and then later departed just a year or two ago for Harvard Business School. In addition to that, he is a columnist for The Atlantic, the host of the podcast, The Art of Happiness with Arthur Brooks, the recipient of 6 honorary degrees, the author of dozens of scholarly journals and the textbook Social Entrepreneurship, was named one of Fortune magazine's 50 of the world's greatest leaders, and is also the best-selling author of 12 books, including his recent and excellent book, Love Your Enemies: How Decent People Can Save America from a Culture of Contempt, and of course, his new release, which just hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, From Strength to Strength. After Arthur gives keynote remarks, St. Paul Academy headmaster Will Norton will pose the first question, and then we'll moderate questions from the audience. Arthur, welcome.
Thank you, Sheree. Thank you to Brad and Will. Thank you to all of you for coming to see my friend Bill Haslam and Governor Cooper, who's running the city that all the cool kids want to live in. And congratulations to all of you living in this beautiful place. I'm delighted to be with you here tonight to talk about an urgent problem, but really an opportunity. One of the great things about being an American is that we are the most entrepreneurial culture. And one of the things that entrepreneurs all have in common is where everybody else sees tragedies and problems and things that can't be solved, entrepreneurs see opportunities. So I want to talk to you tonight about the greatest opportunity that we face, which is how we can love our enemies, come together as a country, and build a better future on the basis of what everybody is regretting today, which is what we see around us. Sheree gave you the data. 1 in 6 Americans today is not talking to a family member because of politics. Imagine that. We find that 17% of people are estranged from a direct family member because of ideology. I mean, these data are incontrovertibly terrible. We find that more than half of Democrats and more than half of Republicans actually say the greatest threat to our country is people in the other party. How can you prosper under those circumstances? Well, I'm not going to spend any more time on what we all know to be true. I'm going to spend time on the solutions to this. Now, when you have a big problem like this, and this has been going on for some years now, I'm not standing up on the stage here in Nashville to tell you about something that's brand new or something that's coming down the pike. We're all alarmed by this. When you have a problem like this that we've had trouble solving, when the big majority of Americans wish it weren't a problem, and when I say that, I mean that as a data scientist. 93% of Americans say they hate how divided we become as a country. That's the good news, because that's the opportunity. That's the market opportunity for us ideologically and as a people to move forward. But we don't know how to do it. Well, when you have a problem like that, the opportunity lies in a new way of thinking. See, you need an epiphany under these circumstances. You can't think harder in the old way when you've hit a wall like we have in America today. This is true in every line of work. This is true in ideology, in politics. This is true in business. This is true in family life, as a matter of fact. When, I'm the father of 3 young adult children. Pray for me. And not long ago, 5 years ago, I remember that I had 3 teenagers, which was fun. And my middle son, his name is Carlos, he was a junior in high school. And we had this old problem we were running into again and again and again. It was his grades. It was like we were frequent flyers in the headmaster's office. It was unbelievable. I mean, week after week, he's not going to graduate. He's getting C's and D's. He failed math. It was again and again. not living up to his potential. And my wife Esther, she's from Barcelona. She says, this is an old problem. We need a new way of thinking about it. You teach entrepreneurship. You always talk about a new way of thinking about it. We need a new way of thinking about this grades problem. And I said, I'm all ears, sweetheart. She says, at least we know he's not cheating. So in that spirit, let's look for a solution. Now, I remember, as a social scientist, when I first saw this problem coming toward us politically as a nation. It was actually before the tumultuous 2016 election. It was in 2014, as a matter of fact. And I remember the month because I was reading a journal article, an academic journal article, a paper, scholarly paper, written by 3 psychologists. And at the time, I was the president of the American Enterprise Institute, and I was supervising a large workforce of scholars. And so I was trying to always stay abreast of the literature. And it was a scholarly institution. So I was reading a lot of these journals, and there was one particular article that caught my eye in February of 2014. It was by 3 psychologists at Northwestern University who were writing about a phenomenon called motive attribution asymmetry. Right. Now, that sounds fancy and complicated. It's actually incredibly simple. All it means, motive attribution asymmetry, is the situation in which you have implacable conflict between 2 people or 2 groups that goes on and can't be sorted out. And what all of these conflicts have in common is an error. And the error is this: both sides believe that they are motivated by love, but that the other side is motivated by hatred. Okay, very simple, right? Motive attribution asymmetry sounds super complicated. See, I'm an academic, and let me fill you in on the secret to being a good academic. You take a simple idea, and you put complicated words on it, and you get tenure. It's great. So, and all conflicts, according to these scholars, is based on this error. They looked at the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. They looked at the Rwandan genocide, the Balkans. They even looked at average divorce. The average divorce is based on motive attribution asymmetry. Look, I love, but she hates. She hates me. And you go to her and she says, no, I'm the one who loves. He hates. I know by his behavior that he hates me. And that attribution asymmetry, that fundamental dichotomy between them, leads them to divorce court. But there's good news. The good news is based on a mistake. And if you can correct the mistake, you can actually lead to some sort of peace, some sort of reconciliation. Now, that was interesting to me as a scholarly matter, but here's what really got my attention in this article. At the end of the article, the scholars say, the authors said, and there's something going on in American politics. It was almost a footnote. That Americans today, Democrats and Republicans, conservatives and liberals, have the same level of motive attribution asymmetry they found, looking at the data, as the Palestinians and Israelis. February 2014. I said, well, this can't be good. Something bad's about to happen. I mean, we're seeing what's happening in the Middle East. Is that coming here? Couldn't get it out of my mind and my heart. And no, at the time, and still, what I do for a living is travel around and talk about ideas. I'm super passionate about that. I love talking to people about ideas. And I'll talk to all different groups. I talk to very left-wing audiences at universities and very right-wing audiences who are activists and business groups that are non-ideological. I talk to my own faith. I'm a Roman Catholic. Most important thing in my life. I talk to a lot of Catholic groups. I talk to a lot of secular groups. Everybody wants to talk about ideas. And this was on my mind about a month after I read that article while I was traveling around. And I found myself in New Hampshire, in Manchester, New Hampshire, at a rally of 600 conservative activists. I was a keynote speaker at huge, really fired up audience, like 3-cornered hats and costumes and the whole thing. And I got there a little bit early. And I noticed there was 15 speakers. It was one speaker after another all day long. And here's the weird thing. I looked at the program, and I was the only speaker on the program not running for president. Yeah, 14 Republican presidential candidates and me. And nobody's going to mistake me for presidential candidate. I mean, America's not ready for a bald president, I think. And But I thought to myself, what can I do that they can't do? Because this is the thing, right? If you're the only one of something, always think to yourself, what can I do that they can't do? You know what it is? I can say anything I want. Because they're, running for president, and that's a hard job. Running for president is a tricky thing. But here's the key. If you're in a really partisan situation, you get in front of an audience that's aligned with your views, and most of them will say, let me tell you something. Everything you think is right, and the other side is stupid and evil and hates America. Mode of attribution, asymmetry. And sure enough, I listened to some of the talks before me, and they were doing the same thing, throwing raw stakes into the audience rhetorically, right? But okay, I know what I'm going to do. Said a little prayer. And I went up there and did my thing. I was giving a talk about policy, about economic policy and foreign policy, whatever. But in the middle, I stopped and I said, my friends, you've been hearing a lot of people that you agree with, and you've been hearing a lot of things that have been applause lines because they've been telling you that you're right. And furthermore, you've been hearing the people who aren't here because they would disagree with you, might not even feel safe here, quite frankly, political liberals, that they're stupid and evil and they hate America. They're stupid and evil and they hate America. But I want you to remember something, I said. I was nervous at this point. I said, they're not stupid and they're not evil. They're just American citizens who disagree with you on politics and policy. And if you want to persuade them, which should be your goal is persuasion, remember, nobody has ever been insulted into agreement in history. If you want to persuade them, you can only do it with one thing, and that's love. It was not an applause line. But there was an applause line. See, it came right afterward. See, this lady in the audience yells out, actually, they are stupid and evil. Now, she wasn't trying to repudiate me or hurt my feelings. No. She was making a joke. It was a festive environment. She was with her friends. I got it. But that was really important, and I remember it because that was the moment that I understood the path forward, because I thought at that moment of Seattle. Why Seattle? It's my hometown. I grew up in Seattle, Washington. And if there's one thing you should know politically about Seattle, it's the most left-wing city in America. Right? It is the most politically progressive place in America. My mother was an artist, and my father was a professor, and they lived in Seattle. What do you think their politics were? I was the only one who wound up being a Republican. In the history of my family, as far as I can tell. I was the only one who's kind of center-right in my views, sort of market-oriented. I was the oddball. I was the black sheep. I was the weird one. I was maybe dropped on my head or something. But let me tell you something about my parents. They were not stupid and they were not evil. They were excellent parents who brought me up in the faith, who brought me up with a sense of what is right, who taught me that we are all sisters and brothers with no exceptions. And I absorbed that. And all of my political beliefs, which I think are mostly right, there probably some are wrong, but I don't know which. But the point is that the values I got from my wonderful parents transcended those things. And that lady in New Hampshire, who I'm sure is a wonderful person, was insulting my mom. And I took it personally. And my friends, that's the secret. See, we often hear today in our culture of activism and anger that real courage is standing up to the people with whom you disagree, sticking it to the people with whom you disagree publicly. That's moral courage. That's wrong. That is maybe a perfectly fine thing to do. You should stand up and say the things that you believe. But that's not moral courage. You know what moral courage is? My father taught me this as a kid. Moral courage is standing up for the people with whom you disagree. Standing up to the people with whom you agree on behalf of those with whom you disagree. That's moral courage. That's super hard to do. That's our path forward in America, is standing up for the other side. Here's the question. How? It's so hard. It's so hard to do that. That's how you lose friends. and lose supporters. If you're a politician, that's how you lose contributors and you lose followers. So how do we do it? Now, to begin with, let's do a little bit of social science. And let's figure out what's actually going on here. What's going on behaviorally here. Now, I talked about motive attribution asymmetry, and a lot of people will say that what motivates this inability to see how other people actually feel, to put ourselves in other people's shoes, to see things from other people's point of view, is that we're just so angry. If you turn on MSNBC or Fox News or the highly partisan news sources, of which most seem to be pretty highly partisan these days, you see plenty of anger. You see kind of the rage-o-matic pundits, talking heads yelling every single night if you turn on cable television at 7 or 8 or 9. Sure enough, there is a lot of anger. But here's the funny thing. Anger actually isn't the problem. Anger is a hot, basic negative emotion. It starts in the limbic system of the brain. The limbic system of the brain is the bundle of tissue at the very middle part of your brain that was evolved over 40 million years and has been intact for the last million. It's your animal sense. It's your onboard processing unit for outside stimuli. It's automatic. Your dog has a limbic system. Your limbic system processes your basic emotions, like your anger and your fear and your disgust and your sadness and your joy and your love and your interest. Those are the basic emotions. When we talk about anger, anger actually isn't a huge problem per se because it's a hot emotion, it's automatic, and what it says is, I'm reacting to something that I heard that I care about. So if you react in anger to somebody in your family, it's I care about you, I care about what you said, and I want to change it. Okay, now, it could be destructive, to be sure. But one of the interesting facts in my business as a social scientist is that anger and divorce are uncorrelated. Now, that's very good news for me, because I'm married to a Spaniard. And the secret to my 3 decades of happy marriage is the lack of correlation between anger and divorce. No, that's not what leads to divorce. And that's not the problem in America. The problem is that we take anger, of which there's plenty, that's a basic, hot, negative emotion, and we take another negative basic emotion called disgust, which is reserved for non-human pathogens. Disgust is something that looks terrible or smells terrible or tastes awful because it's supposed to alert you to a pathogen that might kill you. That's why it was evolved as such. You take anger and disgust and you mix them together and it turns ice cold, and it becomes a complex emotion that philosophers call contempt. Contempt, according to Arthur Schopenhauer, the great 19th century philosopher, is the conviction of the utter worthlessness of another person. Have you ever been treated as stupid, beneath contempt, worthless? You never forget it. It feels terrible because to be regarded as worthless is the ultimate expression of dismissal, even hatred. You should never treat another human with contempt. And yet that is exactly what we find is the way that we translate motive attribution asymmetry to each other. Okay, so what's the problem? Problem number 1, to sum up so far, is that there's a polarization problem in America, to say the least. Behind that is motive attribution asymmetry. The way that is expressed is contempt. To solve the problem, we need to take on and beat contempt. How do we do that? Well, interestingly, I talked to a lot of people who are trying to do different kinds of reconciliation. Peacemaking. I just got back from Medellin, Colombia, where I was until Saturday, where I was talking to people trying to reconcile politically in a country where not that long ago people were killing each other over these differences. It's just a big problem, and I love doing that work. It's so important, but you can also find it closer to home. I have a colleague, somebody who's been on my show, named John Gottman. Some of you have heard of him. He's the world's leading expert in marital reconciliation. He teaches at the University of Washington. And he runs a laboratory with his wife, Julie, the Gottman Marriage Laboratory. This guy's a hero. He's a hero as far as I'm concerned. Why? Simply put, he's brought thousands of couples back together again that were going to get divorced. That's a hero for me. Look, it doesn't matter what our politics are. The one thing that we know is that the basis of a strong society is healthy families. And the basis of healthy families is mom and dad being in love with each other. If somebody can save some who are drifting apart, not everybody, sometimes it's impossible, it seems, but if some can be reconciled, that's God's work. So I love this guy. I love his work. And he says that the reason that people get divorced is motive attribution asymmetry expressed in contempt. And I asked him, so you're dealing with couples all the time that are on their way to divorce court, basically, that are quarreling, and they come into his laboratory, and he gives them advice. I said, how do you know, or can you tell right after you meet somebody if they're going to get divorced? And he said, I can predict with 97% accuracy, after 1 hour, if a couple will be divorced within 3 years. I want to know what you're looking at, so I don't do that. Right? And he said, simple. Eye rolling. Eye rolling. The universal expression of sarcastic dismissal, of derision. That's how we express ourselves in America today, right? Golly, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Right? That's what. Now, I've had teenagers, like many of you have. They're like they roll their eyes so hard they almost fall backwards in their chairs, right? But that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when a peer, when a fellow citizen, somebody who owes you the respect of just listening to you, rolls their eyes when you say something. You never quite forget it. It gets under your skin. You ever had a colleague like that? You say something in a meeting like, oh, there you go again. You know? That's injury. John Gottman says that when people express contempt for each other, it's almost like physical abuse in the way that it actually affects the brain. Now, there's a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate, as part of the limbic system I told you about a minute ago. It has two functions, processing physical pain and processing mental pain. It's the same part of the brain. We have a very efficient, parsimonious brain. You get insulted, you're treated with contempt, it's like being hit. No wonder couples wind up in divorce court. What, did he hit you? Worse. Day after day after day of contempt, which feels the same. Now here's the problem, friends. America is a couple in crisis. America is like a couple that used to love each other, and that now they can't even talk to each other. At the very beginning, when you're first in love, you can't see anything wrong with each other. And then by the end, there's nothing but criticisms. There's nothing but dismissal. And that's how we treat each other because of something as relatively trivial as political differences. Because we're in the habit of expressing ourselves this way. John Gottman says the problem with his couples is that they're in the habit of talking to each other this way. And they don't even know it. That's why there's motive attribution asymmetry. That's why he can say, I love but she hates. And she can say, no, I love but he hates. They don't realize they're saying to each other all day long, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. We have a communication problem in this country. Now, the opportunity's coming, isn't it? You see what I'm talking about? That it used to be irreconcilable differences. We need two countries. We need to ship people out. We need to do something radical. No. We need to communicate better. Now, it doesn't mean that we're not going to have differences. And my argument's going to be in a minute, it's good that we have differences. Because that's excellent. It's called competition. We need to communicate with each other in a way that really expresses what's written on most of our hearts. How do we do that? We have to break the habit of contempt. We have to break the habit of contempt. When I say we, I mean me. When I was doing research for this book, I was looking at my old clips on TV. Brad says he sees me on Squawk Box, you know. But I've done a lot, like anybody in my position, I do a lot of television, you know, debates and CNN and whatever. And I looked back, I was looking at YouTube, just to kind of see how I express myself. And I see a debate I'm having with this nice lady, another economist, about a contentious topic on which we're on opposite sides. The minimum wage, I think it was. And she was making what I considered to be some very ill-considered points. And I rolled my eyes. And I'm telling you, when she went home that night after that debate, I guarantee you, she did not say to her husband, you know, I was debating Arthur Brooks on TV tonight. He was making some good points. I guarantee you, she said, that guy Arthur Brooks is a jerk. And I earned that. And I'll bet you every time she sees me ever since then, she says, there's that jerk. And I can't get it back. I can apologize, but how much good will that do? Maybe some. So here's the key. Why did I do that? Why do we do that? Why is the whole country doing that? You know, you're looking at the television, you see your least favorite politician, which is pretty easy, and you're like, oh, that guy again. You know? And your kids see it, and your family sees it, and your friends see it, and then we all do it. And we get into this habit of contempt. We're contempt machines. Why? Because we have the habit of doing that. So this is what we have to do next, is break that habit. How? One more little neuroscience lesson for the evening is how habits are formed. Habits are all formed and stored in a part of the brain called the Nucleus Accumbens. The Nucleus Accumbens has one job. It's about the size of the end of your index finger. A little piece of tissue. Has one job, which is governing your habits, good and bad. It's amazing, actually, because it frees up your prefrontal cortex, the big meaty part of your brain, to do all these new things and learn these new skills. So for example, maybe when last time you were driving to work, today or whenever, you don't remember driving to work. You just found yourself at work. You weren't drunk or asleep. What happened was that your nucleus accumbens drove you to work, so your prefrontal cortex could do other stuff, like talking on the phone or listening to an audiobook or whatever music, whatever you like to do. That's great. That's an amazing human capability. Here's the bad news. It also governs your terrible habits. That's why habits are hard to break. That's why you can't break them with willpower. For years, I had a terrible habit. You heard about my background. I was a classical musician for a long time. Actually, you got the sanitized version of my biography. You know, it's like, I left college at 19. You know, dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs. You know. What followed was what my parents called my gap decade. You know. Yeah. So, but during all those years, I was a smoker, and I wasn't proud of that. It was the wrong thing to do. It was expensive. It was bad for my health. When I was engaged, and I was going to get married to the woman of my dreams, who still is the woman of my dreams. And one night I woke up and I had burned 10 holes in my bed. And I said to myself, this has got to stop before I get married. Because one thing to kill me, it's another thing to kill her. I got to stop. So I said, okay, I'm just going to use my willpower. I won't smoke. I won't smoke. I always smoked. Kept coming back to it, kept coming back. Till a friend of mine, the guy who played in the orchestra with me in Barcelona, he said, you're doing it wrong. He said, you can't willpower it away. It's very simple. It's hard, but it's simple. Here's what you need to do. Every time you want to smoke, stop, and then wait as long as you can before you smoke. Now, what he was telling me to do was to reprogram my nucleus accumbens. See, the nucleus accumbens works automatically. You get the stimulus, response. Stimulus, response, and it reinforces the process again and again and again. You put space in there, you have a choice of actually doing something else. Do something else. So every time you want to smoke, you stop and have a drink. There's another problem here, but anyway, you get the idea. So this is the same thing. That's how I quit smoking. This is the same thing with any rhetorical habit, any communications habit as well. If you're a contempt addict, and you probably are if you live in America today, you got to break the habit of the eye rolling, of the sarcasm, of the dismissal, of the derision, of all the contempt. How are you going to do it? Every time you feel it, stop and do something else. But what? I asked the wisest man that I know, what should I do? When I feel contempt, what should I do instead? His Holiness the Dalai Lama. This is somebody that I've worked with closely for the past 10 years. We've made a documentary film together. We've written together. I've interviewed him many times, and he's a beloved teacher, mentor, and friend to me, and I feel very privileged to say that. We don't share the same religion. He's a Buddhist. He knows I'm a Catholic. I've tried to convert him many times. He's been resistant. I will continue. But I asked him, I said, Your Holiness, every time I feel contempt rising in me, what should I do? And he said, at that moment, use it as an opportunity, good, to show warm-heartedness. And I said, what else you got? Because, that just sort of sounds, I don't know, weak. Then I thought about it. Some of you may or may not know the story of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He's the leader of the Tibetan Buddhist people, and he, until relatively recently, was the political leader of Tibet in exile. In 1959, he was kicked out with sheer military aggression by the most populous military force in the world's history, the Communist Chinese. Sent him into exile, poor, to be forgotten, to be just disappeared. Might makes right, which we've seen again and again and again throughout history. And what would happen under these circumstances? We'd forget about the Tibetans. We'd forget about the Dalai Lama. And yet, over the 60 years that followed, he became the world's most respected religious figure. How did he pull that one off? He's got no money. He's got no troops. He's got no force. He did it by practicing warm-heartedness. I know it. He says, and I believe him because I've experienced this myself, that he wakes up every day and prays for the Chinese leaders. Not that they will give him back his homeland, but they will lead happy and fulfilled lives. Pure goodness, pure love, pure warm-heartedness. And that witness to warm-heartedness has rocketed around the world and lifted up the cause of Tibet and made the Dalai Lama a Nobel Peace Prize winning leader who has posters on college freshmen' walls. Incredible. The force of love. So when he says that, and he can do that, well, just maybe I can do that too. So how? I said, Your Holiness, good advice. How? Help me. And he said, think of a time when you were treated with contempt, treated with hatred, and you responded with love. And then remember how that felt in your heart, that little flame that came alive in your heart. And then recreate the feeling, and the action will follow. This is very good psychology, by the way. Because what this does is it reverses the causality of the action. And in so doing, by going from the feeling, you can get the virtuous action. This is something that we see a lot in the research on psychology, but it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Remember how good you feel when you act like the person you want to be, and you will be that person. Remember a time. Now, there aren't that many instances where I just spontaneously responded to somebody's hate with love. I'm not a saint. I want to be a saint, but I'm working on it. So I remembered a time, however, which was in 2006. It was a long time ago now. It was the first time I ever wrote a book that like human beings ever read. I was an academic, and I was leading a life beavering away of perfect academic bliss and obscurity, which means I wrote books that were complicated and nobody really read. But look, it was good. I had tenure, and then I wrote a book that was equally boring and technical, but it hit the news cycle in just the right way. And President Bush read it and invited me to the White House, and I was in all the papers suddenly. And there was a weird thing. My life changed kind of forever, because suddenly I was on all the talk shows and I was on television, and my scholarship was being read by human beings. And I started hearing from people all over the country who were now reading this book. It was a book about charitable giving. And it asked, who gives more, conservatives or liberals? I didn't have a dog in the fight. I just looked at the data, and I came to a conclusion that one side liked and the other side didn't like. And so I started hearing from people all over the country, and if they liked my book, it was very easy to get my email, because I taught at Syracuse University in those days. And if they liked my book, they would say they liked me. And if they didn't like the book, they didn't like me, and they told me that I was a bad guy and a liar. This was very weird for me. And I remember one day, about 2 months after the book came out, I was in my office working on Wednesday or something, and an email comes in. I was getting dozens of emails. An email comes in from a stranger in Texas. Dear Professor Brooks, you are a right-wing fraud. Bad start. But I'm a good sport. I'm going to read the whole email, because I was reading everybody's email. And I noticed when I'm halfway through the email that this thing is like 5,000 words long. It's going to take me 20 minutes to read it. But I'm plowing through it. And this guy was vitriolic in detail about every fact, every data set, every conclusion in my book. I mean, even details like, I think that the columns in table 3.1 are reversed, you moron. I mean, like that. But as I got 2/3 through the email, I realized what I was really feeling was gratitude. He read my book. Nobody read my books before. I mean, like, my family didn't read my books, right? So I said to myself, I got nothing to lose. I'm not going to see this guy in Texas. I'm going to say what's written on my heart right now, because why not? So I wrote back to him. I said, you're so-and-so. I know you hate the book. I know you hate me. It's terrible. I'm terrible. It's all terrible. I get it. But you took time to read the whole thing, and I put 2 years of my life into that project. I'm so grateful to you. Thank you. Send. Go back to work. I'll never hear from that guy again. Ding, there's his email. Now I'm apprehensive. Maybe he wants to kill me or something. I don't know. Right? I open it up. Dear Professor Brooks, next time you're in Dallas, if you want to get some dinner, give me a call. What just happened? What happened was he didn't even expect me to see it or read it. He was expressing himself. And he saw that there was a human being on the end of that email who read it and then treated him with some respect and even a little bit of friendship, and it changed his heart. But more importantly, it changed my heart. See, I went into that thinking this jerk and feeling really defensive, but then feeling a little bit of gratitude and then telling him, and I felt closer to God. Just for that 15 minutes between when I sent the email and when he wrote back to me. And I got that weird response from him, and it showed me that this is the secret. Maybe you don't get the response back like that. Maybe you get more abuse, maybe. But the question is not how you can change them. The question is how you can change you. And love changes you. That's what I learned that day. I actually never had dinner with him. I'd probably be chained to a pipe in his basement right now or something. I don't know. Is that too edgy for the Trinity Forum? I don't know. Anyway, but this is the secret, isn't it? This is the secret. Break the habit by consciously bringing love where you find contempt. So let me give you some homework on how you can do this. And let me start with what I don't want you to do, which is I don't want you to agree. Agreement is a kind of mediocrity. You know, I love competition. Competition in politics is called democracy. I don't want elections with one person running unopposed. I want competition. Competition in economics is called the free enterprise system, which has literally pulled 2 billion of my sisters and brothers out of poverty since I was a kid. That's competition. We need it. And the most important kind of competition of all that lies behind all the politics, behind all the economics, is the competition of ideas. And that requires that we disagree. I told you before, I think I'm politically mostly right, but I'm pretty sure I'm wrong on a lot. I just don't know what I'm wrong on. And the only way for me to find out is to be surrounded by people who disagree with me. The Proverbs say that iron sharpens iron. That's what we need, is to not to disagree less, but to disagree better. What else don't we need? Civility, tolerance. These are garbage standards. If I told you that my wife Esther and I are civil to each other, you'd say, you need counseling. If I told you that my employees tolerate me, you'd say I have a huge HR problem on my hands. No, no, no. The right standard is love in disagreement. So I'll only give you some positive assignments. 3, to be exact. The first is to go and search. Remember I told you 93% of Americans hate how divided we become as a country? That means 7% don't hate it. That's bad news. Who are they? They're disproportionately people who are profiting from outrage. People in politics, people in media, people in social media. When you hate, somebody's profiting and it's not you. Go in search of people who are professionally in the business of driving us apart and turn them off. It doesn't help to turn off people not on your side because you weren't being influenced by them anyway. Turn off the people on your side that are your id. They're making you feel those forbidden thoughts about your fellow citizens, things that you wouldn't say because you're a civilized person, but you kind of enjoy it when your favorite columnist does it, your favorite television or radio show host does it. Turn it off. Do a favor to yourself and do a favor to our country and turn it off. The outrage industrial complex starts with you. Second, go looking for hatred and go running toward it. Now, if I told you most pathogens, I would tell you to avoid them, like the coronavirus. Somebody has the coronavirus. Don't kiss them on the mouth, for example, unless you also have the coronavirus. You get my point that pathogens are things to avoid, except this one. Don't avoid contempt, because this is your opportunity to become more morally perfect. I've had a lot of missionaries on both sides of my family. I come from an evangelical Christian background, and I converted to Roman Catholicism as a teenager. Kind of rebellion. My parents thought it was better than drugs. And I mean, I had a lot of missionaries on both sides of the family. Here's the weird thing about missionaries. They're always happy, but they face constant rejection. You know what nobody's ever said in human history? Great news, there's missionaries on the porch. Ever, right? Pretend we're not home, you know? And yet they're beaming. Why? Because they're bringing truth where there's lies. They're bringing light where there's darkness. This is important because if you're bringing something that truly can lift people up, can save their souls, wouldn't you be happy to do that? Because occasionally when that lands, you've done something better than what anybody else could do for that person. It's the ultimate gift. And that's a joy, is to bring that kind of a gift. You are missionaries for love, whether you're doing it from a religious standpoint or not. You are secular missionaries for love and against contempt. This is what we can all do. Now, it's tricky, right? It means you have to go places where people disagree with you. If you don't have any friends who disagree with you, you need more friends. You need to go to a house of worship that is different than your particular beliefs. You need to find people who disagree and listen to them with love and offer up your values as a gift and not as a weapon. Now, there's lots of ways to do this too. It's hard. You might have to change your rhetorical techniques. John Gottman, my marriage counselor friend, when he has a couple that's quarreling, he makes them carry around notebooks, both literally notebooks, and they have to write down everything that they want to criticize about their partner. Right? But before you say it, write it down, right? But before you do that, you have to say 5 loving, affirming things first. Why? Because we're retraining you rhetorically, is the whole idea. So it's like, yep, she picked me up late again. Gonna lay into her for that. But first, you look beautiful tonight. And it was very thoughtful of you to leave dinner out for me when I came home late. And I love your mother. That's too much. Anyway, you get the idea. We can do the same thing. If you have a hard time on social media, if you have a hard time in politics, use the 5-to-1 technique. See, here's the thing. You never get to the 6th because you get stuck in the 5. It changes you. Remember, the whole point of expressing love where there is hate is to change your own heart. And that's a good technique for doing it. Find contempt, run toward it with love. This is your evangelical opportunity to bring peace, reconciliation, and love back to our country. And finally, number 3, is show some gratitude. You know, one of the incredible things that I find about the political climate in America today is that the far right and the far left, you know, there's one thing they agree on, is that America is a crummy country in decline. Totally. I mean, listen to the rhetoric. This country is, you know, can you believe it? You know, everything we do is stupid. Everything we do is a failure. It's just against everything that we do. That is inaccurate, and it's insane. This is the greatest, most upwardly mobile, charitable country that is prosperous, that is giving, that is open in the history of the world. We know these things are true. We also know it's not perfect. We also know the country's not perfect. We also know that we can make lots and lots of progress, which is one of the reasons that you're here and you're concerned citizens, because you want to make progress. But let's not kid ourselves and think there's something horrible about this country, that we should be ungrateful for living in this country. It's amazing when I think about it. I mean, look at you. There's 200 of us, and you all have different stories. You know, 3 generations ago, your ancestors were scratching up potatoes in Ireland, or running from some godforsaken shtetl, or being brought to this country involuntarily. All different stories. But you know, the one story we all have in common is that we descend from ambitious riffraff, and we're proud of it. That's a great country. And we should be grateful for it. And by the way, this is one of the greatest techniques for happiness that I teach to my students at the Harvard Business School. I teach a class on the science of happiness. And I make them make gratitude lists, where they have to list on Sunday night the 5 things they're most grateful for. And every day during the week, they have to contemplate, ponder that list for 5 minutes, and then update it every Sunday. At the end of 10 weeks, they're 25% happier than they were at the beginning. It's free. You must do it, and it's accurate when it comes to America. This is a country that we should be grateful for, that we should treasure, and that we should be grateful for together across our differences and because of our differences. There is no, I could write on social media right now that I hate the President of the United States and I think he's a dummy. And there would be no jackbooted thug and there would be no knock in the night God bless America. And all of us would sacrifice for this country. By the way, I never told you the end of the story about my son Carlos. He did graduate from high school, barely. He is now Corporal Carlos Brooks, U.S. Marine Corps. Hoorah! He loves this country just like you do. He's willing to sacrifice for this country just like you would. And we will not continue to have that spirit of love and spirit of sacrifice unless we have the spirit of accurate gratitude. Yep. So, let me sum up with one image before I turn it over to you to hear what's on your mind. And this is the image that I want to come back to, which is the missionary. I want you to join me as missionaries for this country, for the reconciliation and love that we need, and to bring that and have the joy that that actually brings. You know, it was my wife and I, we teach pre-marriage counseling. It's called pre-Cana in the Catholic Church. And so once a month we have 30 couples together. And we're talking to them about the secrets of happy marriage and communication. And you know, we didn't speak the same language when we met, and our communication has marginally improved in 30 years. And I have to, so we, you know, have something to talk about. And when we were doing this a couple of months ago, or a few months ago, I was afterward, I was saying my prayers in the chapel of this Catholic retreat center where we were doing this thing. And as I stood up to leave, I noticed a sign before I went out to the parking lot. Okay, it was actually for the people in the chapel before they went home. It wasn't for people coming in, it was people going out. And the sign said, "You're now entering mission territory." I said, that's good advice. That's good advice for all of us, whether you're a believer or not, no matter what your religion or no religion happens to be, that if we want to bring this idea, we need the zeal of the missionary to bring something beautiful and true, to set our hearts on fire and have a working probability of setting other people's hearts on fire as well. And the only way we're going to do that is by imagining a sign over these doors as we go out tonight, so that we, right here in Nashville, Tennessee, tonight, that we remember that as we leave, we're entering mission territory. God bless you and thank you.
Arthur, thank you for your timely and poignant reflections, and we're so delighted to have you here. Brad, on behalf of the St. Paul community, thank you for hosting, and Cherie, it's nice to have a sense of normalcy. And we are going to transition into our Q&A. We have 2 mics down here, so if you'd like, if you have a question and you'd like to come up and present it, we'll alternate between the two. And I have the opportunity of presenting the first question. So a lot of fun, because there's a large body of work, from happiness to market economy to divisions in society. But I think sticking to the topic of tonight, I'd be curious, what is the virtues that have been your favorite of people who are able to actually step into the things that you think are helpful in regards to loving and bringing unity, and then as 2 institutions, MBA and St. Paul, that are centered upon bringing our nation's youth and families that are looking to do the same. What kind of culture have you noticed that kind of brings about those virtues in the best way?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Now, the discussion of virtues is really one of habits. And there's a whole Aristotelian philosophy, the basis of philosophy based on the idea that your habits and your virtues, that they're intrinsically interlinked. So really what we're talking about, people who bring the best that they can bring as citizens of this country, these are the people who have good happiness habits. They're really good, and if you have good happiness habits, to be a happy person, you must share it with others. So I teach this class called Leadership and Happiness, as I mentioned, at the Harvard Business School. And you know, if I had to teach the class in effectively just 90 seconds, I get a whole semester, thank goodness, because I'm talking about the brain, I'm talking about the studies, et cetera, et cetera. I would say that the 4 happiness habits, the happiest people, they have 4 habits in common. And in so doing, they're happy people and they bring happiness to other people, which is to say that they're virtuous. And the 4 happiness habits are faith, family, friendship, and work that's meaningful. That's it. Now, there's a lot of things that go into your happiness. It's 50% genetic, according to the studies. The 50% is, it's based on identical twin studies, where identical twins were separated and adopted to separate families, and you look at their personalities when they're 40 years old. And 25% of your happiness is circumstantial, depending on what's going on that's not under your control. But look, you can't control your genetics. You can control some switches based on your habits. Your circumstances are largely out of your control. And by the way, the happiness that comes from circumstances or unhappiness, it wears off remarkably quickly. So you shouldn't worry about that either. Life is going to take its course. All you should be worrying about is your habits. If you want a happiness 401k, which you should have, you should be putting in your 4 accounts every single day. You should be walking the transcendental path. What that means to you is up to you, but you need to have something that's bigger than you. You need to be serious about cultivating your family life, the ties that bind and don't break and you wouldn't choose, and God knows in many cases you probably wouldn't. Your friendship, which is real hard for a lot of you strivers, fellow strivers. You have a lot of deal friends, maybe not so many real friends. You need to cultivate real friendship. That's your 3rd account every single day. And finally, work, and work has got to have 2 characteristics. I don't care if you're a bus driver or the headmaster of a private school or a college professor or a politician. You got to have 2 characteristics of your job for it to truly bring you joy. You have to earn your success. Your accomplishments have to be rewarded for your merit and hard work and personal responsibility, and you have to serve people who have less power than you. You have to be a servant. If you have earned success and service to others, that's where your work will give you joy. So that's it. That's it. These are the happiness habits, which are also the virtues. And this is what we need to train our children and ourselves and our loved ones and everybody to remember, that they have 4 accounts: their faith, their family, their friendship, and meaningful work.
So we'll welcome any questions, and we do have 3 guidelines for questions. The 3 B's: be brief, be civil, and be in the form of a question. So don't come up with a statement or a pontification that might go a different way. So welcome anybody up to the microphone who'd like to have the first question.
Being here tonight.
Thank you.
What have you discovered that you've been wrong about in the past 5 years that struck you as most surprising and meaningful?
Yeah, the thing that I think that I have been most wrong about is that people who disagree with me politically, that I thought they were more different from me than they actually were. And that's called the conceit of small differences. It's actually an identifiable phenomenon in social science, but I learned it by running experiments where I would bring people together who were really on the fringes politically, which I'm not, but I'd bring people together on the fringes, and I would ask them to talk about politics. It would be like the 4th of July. It would be terrible. Until I discovered something, that if I asked them to start the conversation by talking about their children, that they couldn't disagree on politics very well, because it was literally moving the conversation to a different part of their brain, which occupied a lot more brain tissue, but more importantly, occupied a lot more moral space in their lives. If you actually concentrate on the things which you have in common, that's what really matters a lot to you. And if they have teenage kids, it's like a common enemy, and then it's especially unifying. Is what I would find with my test subjects. And so this is the key thing. What I realized, and what I don't think I had quite captured, is that we all want a better country, and we all want our kids to be safe and to thrive. I was going to say happy, but I don't think that's actually what we want. We want our kids to be flourishing, and part of that is to be unhappy, quite frankly, to suffer in the right way. And people want the best, and how we express that and how we understand that is very different. And that difference is intrinsically important if we actually start with the common loves. And I don't think that until I started deeply working on this in my prayer life and in my intellectual life, that I properly understood that. I thought that people who disagree with me were really, really different than me. And I think that most of the differences are actually quite trivial. And I'm sorry I felt that way, and I'm sorry I didn't learn that earlier.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Hi.
This has been a wonderful reminder. How critical is union either chosen, like marriage, or born into, as in we're all Americans, to this premise of love in place of contempt? Would you be delivering the same message to Russians and Ukrainians, Israelis and Palestinians, or is there something sort of part of that union, either chosen or born into, that's critical to this notion you shared with us? And thank you.
I think that's a great question. I've actually never heard that question before. I think that it is practically natural law that I believe, and part of this is my beliefs as a Christian man, that we are made to love because we're made in God's image. God is creative and God is love, and I'm supposed to be a miniature version. And as such, when I'm my true self, when I'm living up to my true best self, I'm trying to be as godlike as I possibly can. I'm trying to live up to the divine within. And when I'm not living up to that, it's because I'm going in the wrong direction, because I'm idolatrous, or I'm fooled, or something's deeply wrong in my life. And I think that everybody is happiest when they're living up to this, when everybody wants to love their neighbors and even to love their enemies, which, by the way, is the most subversive teaching in human history. You know, Matthew 5:44, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Nobody ever said that before the Master said that. And the result of it has changed the course of human society. Occasionally we've bent toward the good again and again when we actually remember this. And you can touch people's hearts with it. As I mentioned before, I just got back from Medellin, Colombia on Saturday morning. I was there talking about loving your enemies. And I was talking to people who a generation ago, 15 years ago, would have been shooting each other out in the jungle. People would have been killing each other. And instead they were sitting together listening to this Yankee talking about loving their enemies, but with my big old accent in Spanish. It's really rather an incredible thing. I think that this is what touches the hearts of women and men most integrally. People are resistant to the message. People will be resistant to it all the time. Look, the classic case of being resistant to it, I gave a message like this at the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. in 2020, right before the coronavirus epidemic. I shared the dais with President Trump. And I gave the talk, and I had this, I was sitting next to, between Nancy Pelosi and Vice President Pence, and President Trump was on the other side of the dais, and we were the two speakers, me and the president. And I talked about loving your enemies, and I talked about how this could change the world, and I talked about how this is our moment, and I had this little conceit that maybe the president would walk behind me over to Nancy Pelosi and just bury the hatchet for like a minute, right? But no. I mean, after I spoke, he got up and he said, I love it when Arthur Brooks gives a speech. It's like being in church, he said, which I thought was kind of nice until he said, but I disagree with him about loving your enemies. And I thought, gutsy move. You just disagreed with Jesus at the National Prayer Breakfast. It's like, yeah, I mean, he went there. So there's resistance. But I think the resistance is actually unnatural. I think our natural selves are to want this. I think it's all human beings and their hearts want this. And if we can bring this, we can bring what people desire, what they crave, what's really written on their hearts as well. And that's what I'm dedicating the rest of my life to bringing. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. I think I remember from your most recent book, you grew up in a Protestant family,
Yeah.
and changed to Catholicism. And of all the things you said tonight, I'm a Reformed Faith Presbyterian, there are very few of us left in America. So it leads me to ask the question, how much of this is a function of the secularization of the world? Because I think you talked about your wife's country in Spain, and everybody thinks everybody's Catholic and everybody goes to church, and for most of Europe, no one goes to church.
Yeah.
So how much is that a function of what's happening to us and how we relate to one another? And how do we address that in a world that is clearly pulling away from what's historically been a very Christian culture in our country, or a very faith-based culture,
Yeah.
to give credit to all faiths?
It's a great question, and my colleagues and I, especially those who share my worldview, have been looking at exactly this for the longest time. I know many atheists who agree with me and want the best, and who have true love in their hearts. I know a lot of people of other faiths that are not mine that are better than I am, just frankly better than I am. But I honestly believe that the transcendental path, that the search for the metaphysical truth leads us more inexorably toward these truths. It makes it easier to do this. Now, I'm not saying which is right. I mean, that's, as they say, above my pay grade. I have my beliefs on what's right. I'm talking about what will actually lead people to these types of behaviors. And I believe that religious faith helps you a lot to be happy and to want the good of the others. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas, incidentally, defined in his Summa Theologica, which is out there, it's like copies of Unhappiness by, I love this place, by the way. You know, it's like parts of the Summa of Aquinas are out there. And what he defined to love is very interesting. He said to love is to will the good of the other. To will, think about that. I mean, we think about love as a feeling. It's a feeling that I have when I have warmth. No. That's sentimentality. To love is to will the good of the other, notwithstanding your feelings. You know, to like, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and November 17th, 1957, in Dexter Street Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, he gave this sermon on Matthew 5:44 on love your enemies. And he said, Jesus didn't say to like your enemies, because to like is a sentimental something. He was such a great preacher. To like is a sentimental something. Jesus said to love your enemies because only when you love your enemies can you redeem your enemies. But that's a conscious act. It's hard-edged. It requires actual discipline. And where do you learn to love your enemies? For most people, it's in our faith. For most people, that's the best master class that you can possibly get. So what does this mean for the secularization of America and indeed the world? It means that we're not in the zenith of where we were, but it means this huge opportunity, if you share faith, to actually share this incredible gift with other people. I mean, there's just more opportunity to help people, more opportunity to lift people up. I think that we're potentially at the brink of a new enlightenment because there's a search. I mean, I tell you, I see my students at Harvard University, and they'll come to my office hours with a pretext of talking sometimes about their paper or something. And they want to talk about their faith journey. It's not necessarily my faith journey, but they want to talk about their own transcendental path. And I see this big opportunity. So if you share faith, it's your opportunity to share that with other people. It's such a gift that you can bring, and to look at the world as we see it today as fertile ground for bringing this back with that as the vehicle. Thanks.
Last question.
So one of the areas, probably the area where there's the most bitter and strong division in this country today is education, both public and private. People clearly have strong views on both sides, and there's little love at all. If any of you have been following the news on this, is there any way to restore, get people back together and turn our education system around? Because if there's one thing that both sides agree on is that it's deeply troubled. Okay, so how can we turn our education system around and get out of this cycle where we're of this, what do you call it, the opposite feeling where you don't talk, it started...
The contempt.
Get over the contempt.
The mode of attribution asymmetry.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yes, okay.
See, I read the book.
How do we get over that in our education system?
Yeah. So this is an example. The education system is an example of one of any number of policy differences, policy and political differences that we have that are, what they are is a battleground for the culture war. And you know, the culture war is being fought in all sorts of bitter and frankly, incredibly unethical ways. I mean, when I go to colleges, one of the most unpopular things that I say in college campuses is that baby boomers, people my age, are trying to recruit you as child soldiers in their culture war. By setting you up to be contemptuous of other people, to say in a Manichaean worldview of good and evil, of bad and good, of light and darkness, and people who disagree with you are irredeemably horrible people. You're just being brainwashed. You're child soldiers is what you are, and it's completely unethical. And there are a lot of battlegrounds in policy, and education is one of them, and taxes and economics and foreign policy, and you go down the abortion, and you can go down the line about all of these policy battles. Here's the key, as far as I'm concerned, for all of us, for people who agree with me on education and people who disagree with me on education. You are sunk if you're using your values as a weapon. You've eviscerated the moral content of your policies. How can we actually come together where both sides use their values as a gift? You don't ring the doorbell and smack somebody in the face with a bouquet of flowers. This is unpersuasive in telling you I love you. The way that you do that, and by the way, all you'll do is, there's a lot of, you don't need a social scientist like me to tell you, but there's plenty of research that shows that when you use your values as a weapon, if you're strongly pro-life like I am, and you say that people who disagree with you just want to kill babies, what you've done is you've driven them farther to the other side, and you've gone in the wrong direction if you actually want to persuade and take the game forward, if you want to actually make progress. You can't do that. So this is the same thing in any policy area, including education. Are you bringing the idea of your policy ideas, which are supposed to help people, as opposed to fighting things, helping people, and bringing them in the spirit of love relentlessly toward other people and offering them to people as a gift? If you're not, you're doing it wrong. And in America, we're doing it wrong.
Arthur, thank you. That's great. You know, I think we could listen to this for many more hours. We won't keep you here, but thank you for all of that and for giving us our mission if we choose to accept it. So really appreciate it. We highly commend Arthur's books. His two most recent are out there for sale. They are pre-signed, so they're each there for $28 for Love Your Enemies and From Strength to Strength. The sales desk will be right out there, and want to encourage you to avail yourself of that invitation. And we want to issue another invitation as well, which is to join the Trinity Forum Society, and that brochure should be on each of your chairs. That is an invitation to join the community that makes the mission of the Trinity Forum possible, to have more conversations like this about what matters most, to connect leading thinkers and thinking leaders, to distribute the best of Christian thought, and to come to better know the author of the answers. So we hope that you will avail yourself of that invitation. There are many benefits of joining the Trinity Forum Society, including a subscription to our quarterly Trinity Forum readings, including excerpts from the Summa Theologica, which is just outside, as well as many other authors that Arthur mentions in his book, including folks like Mandela, Bonhoeffer, Augustine, Orwell, and the like. But as a special benefit of joining the Trinity Forum Society tonight, you will get a free copy of your choice of either Love Your Enemies or From Strength to Strength. So hope that you will avail yourself of that. If you would like to be further involved in this collaboration with Trinity Forum, Montgomery Bell Academy, and St. Paul Academy, we would love to have you do that, whether as a sponsor of these events, either the next one or the one after that. Simply let us know if that's the case. You can talk to me, talk to Brad, talk to Will, talk to any of my colleagues, and maybe they can just stand and wave where they are so they are easily identified. That would be great. Finally, we started with thanks. Arthur talked to us about gratitude. We will end with thanks as well. And want to thank again our sponsors. Just so appreciate your generosity that made this evening possible. Thank our partners, Brad and Will. Thank you to our photographer, Allison Ankins, and videographer, Barry McAllister. Our stalwart volunteers, Ashley Larmer, Lauren Heston, Jeanette Leggett, and Amy Richardson. I'd like to thank my own able colleagues, Nikki Sheffield, Molly Wicker, and Izzy LaHosit. Thank you, of course, and over to Arthur Brooks for those fascinating and really inspiring comments. And finally, thank you to each of you for your presence and participation tonight. Good night.